Okay, so before we get started, if you're not familiar with Linux, Linux is essentially the kernel that powers your operating system. It's like Windows NT is one of the kernels for Windows, for example. So without getting in too heavy in the weeds, think of that as like the way that the operating system works, and the distribution is just the flavor of operating system, essentially. So think of like where you got Windows 10, Windows 7, Windows 11, Windows Server, for example. Those are all just essentially would be equivalent of like a distribution. Like I said, I'm simplifying this to make it as easy as possible, but essentially that's kind of what it is without going into too much detail. If you want to learn about the history of it, there's great documentation out here on YouTube about it. On a side note, if you see me looking over at this screen, that's where my notes are. That's why I'm just making sure that I'm telling you right. And I'm not really good with using the teleprompter on it. So with that being said, what we're going to do is we're going to install Ubuntu, which is a distribution of Linux, and I'm going to install the server edition, but they do have a graphical one, which is a desktop operating system. That works out really well. For what I'm going to focus on is the command structure. So like if you open up a terminal, it's essentially like the Linux version of command prompt, if you're familiar with that. And we're going to walk through some of these commands and kind of get your feet wet. Most of the time when you're in a business environment, you have a server side. You typically don't run a full GUI or a desktop version on your server unless you absolutely needed to. With that being said, let me share my screen and we'll go ahead and jump into this. Okay, so as you can see, this is the canonical which owns Ubuntu. We're on their downloads page. We're going to download their newest version, which is the 24.04. And this is the server version. As you can see, it has like the systems requirements, what's new, and different ways to install. As well as if you come over here, like I said, they do have a desktop version. Normally, if you're getting started with Linux, I recommend you can mess with the desktop version. It definitely helps. But if you're trying to use this in like a production server environment, typically you don't have, like I said, a GUI on it. So I want to show you this. I'm going to spin it up in a virtual machine. And as soon as I get that spun up, then we'll go ahead and continue on. Okay, so I have it setting here. Let me go ahead and start the virtual machine. And when you start their disk, you want to try and or install. So we'll go ahead and hit enter. Okay, so from here, let me go ahead and zoom in. You guys should be able to see this. Instead of having like a point and click interface for the installer, it's all command driven. So from here, I will hit enter because I want English. And it's telling me my installer needs to be updated, or I can do it without it. So if you look down here, it's saying either I can continue without the update or go ahead and update to the new installer. I'll go ahead and update to the new installer, just hit enter. And give it a little bit of time so it'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so we're back. So now it's asking us which language would we like to use. So I prefer English and USD, and that is exactly where I'm at. So I'll go ahead and hit enter. So right here, it's going to ask me which type of installation would I like. Ubuntu Server is the most common, so it already has a bunch of stuff that they know that most people are going to need for their server environment. So most of the tools that are already important for a server is there. Now they do have a minimal one which has even less. But with that being said, the minimal one would be something that if you're making like you needed to be really sensitive on it. I've seen people use it, but it's not as common. And now the additional third party, since Ubuntu and Linux is on the open source community, they're not just going to install proprietary drivers or anything like that, any third-party drivers by default. So if you needed that, you would come down here and click on it. So like where I can move my mouse up, I can see where the little dots are moving. So if I needed that, then I could just click on that and hit my space bar. I don't need that, so I'm just going to click done. Now here is where it's asking me about my network adapters. So as you can see, my network is on a DHCP network, so it has an address. But if I needed to come up here and I wanted to set this with a static IP address, I could come up here and do that and click Edit IPv4. This is where I would do it, or if I was doing VLAN tagging or IPv6, this is where I would actually set this up at. I'm okay with it being DHCP for now. Typically in a server environment, though, you will hit IPv4 and then you'll switch this from automatic to manual. And here's where you would set it. Actually, let's go ahead and set it static. Might as well. So subnet, this is going to vary by your network. So like my network, I'm on the 40 network, so I'm going to do that. And then I'll give it an IP address, and then my gateway, and then my name server. So this is so my DNS can work. And if I want it to, I can add a backup one, which I only have one on this network. So I can do that, so it'll use a public DNS. And I can hit save, and as you can see, it went ahead and is checking to see if it can work. And at the bottom, it said could not connect, and then now it's that way. So we went ahead and set this static, so we know what the IP address is. We'll go ahead and click done. Do I have any proxies in order for it to get out? Nope. So I'm going to hit enter. So the mirror list is, instead of going out and hitting canonical directly, there's a lot of repos that will help it so it can update itself. So that's what this is doing. It's going out and getting the information it needs to get all of these different mirrors that's out there that might help it get there. So give it a little bit of time, and as soon as it gets done, basically we'll hit done. Now here's where a lot of people get overwhelmed at is the disk configuration. Do I want to use the entire disk, or do I want to set it up anything different? Now, one of the big areas that I would recommend is, say you do want to use this LVM disk encryption, here is the best time to set it up. After your server's already running, it is quite challenging. You can do it still, but it is challenging. So here is where I would go ahead and specify it. Maybe I had a specific layout I wanted to use for certain directories. I don't. I'm going to say just use the entire disk, but if I was being very picky about how I wanted different things to lay out, I would do it here. Instead, I'm going to come down here, just hit down until I get to done. And then, as you can see by default, what it does is the mount point itself, and it gives you the /boot, and there's a bunch of information here. Without going into too much detail, it tells you what it's going to do and where it's going to put your files at. So I'm okay with just these two partitions that it's going to create. So I'm just going to hit done. And it's going to ask me, am I sure? Yes, I am sure. So from here, it's already started the installation process, and I can go ahead and start my account configuration. So what's my name? And I'm going to go and call it Brian, and the server's name, I'm going to call this dev-test, I guess. Or what username do I want? Admin is a reserved one, so I'm just going to do admin. Typically, you're going to create more secure accounts, but I'm just going to do this. What I set mine to is admin. But since this is a practice one, I don't really care. If I'm part of Ubuntu Pro, this is where I would do this. I'm going to skip this for now. And then, do I want to be able to SSH into this server? Do I want to remotely manage and connect into this one? Yes. So I'll hit the space bar since my little cursor's there. If I already had my own SSH keys, I would go ahead and do it here, but I'm not doing that. It can go ahead and generate me one. And then I will hit done. These are some additional services that a lot of people use. So it's asking you, hey, or do you want to use these features? And not right now. So I'm just going to come over and hit continue. Right now it's going through the installation process of setting up my Ubuntu server. All right, now it is officially done. As you can see at the bottom, the show full log or reboot now. So I'm going to go over and click reboot now. And now it should be restarting the server. Okay, so from here, it's rebooting the server, and that's where we're going to leave off on this video. Essentially, what we've done so far is we taken a image file and we've deployed it. So now we have a Windows server we can mess with in our lab environment. And then we'll go ahead in the next video, get logged into it. Since we did enable SSH, we can get into it through that, so we don't have to be on this server to get to it. And then we'll start with some of the basic commands. So I hope this video has been informative. I appreciate you for watching, and please go ahead, if this is something you're interested in, give me a like, a subscribe. It will also help if this is the course you'd like to see. Go ahead and continue to the next video. Thank you.